Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of your Bish Therapist podcast. I am your host, Melissa Reich, your Bish Therapist, a real life therapist turned pop culture aficionado, serving clinical interpretations and hot takes on all things pop culture. And as you can hear, your Bish is still sick. So today's episode, I wanted to make sure I got it out to you all. I did miss last week. And first of all, I just wanted to thank all of you people were so sweet and kind and reached out to me, whether it be on Instagram or via email or what have you. And I just want to say I appreciate you all. I appreciate this community. I'm so grateful for you all. And I am on the mend. It just takes me twice as long as it takes everybody else. So today's episode is going to be me doing the best that I can. Still coughing a lot and all those things. And don't worry, I'm going to edit all that out, which is a real pain, but I'm going to. So what I'm going to do today is talk about Summer House. I'm going to talk as long as I can talk. Might be a half hour. I have no idea. But, I wanted to make sure to get you out an episode this week. When my last episode 2 weeks ago, I mentioned that my husband had the plague and I could feel that I was getting it. And literally the day after I released that episode, I was just down for the count. So it's been 2 weeks now. Essentially what happened was there's been this wild virus going around, and it's not just where I live. It's kind of everywhere. Obviously we know how viruses work, but I have some family in the Midwest and they were really sick with it. So it was this weird virus that was just really hard on us and hard on a lot of people. People are getting really sick. Honestly, my husband, we've been together for 22 years since college. And in 22 years, I, honest to God, have never seen him so sick, which, thank goodness one of us is in good health, right? So it took him down for 2 weeks. It took me down. I've been on steroids and antibiotics. I'm immunocompromised. And so when people with chronic illness or chronic cancer get a regular person illness, it's just like insult to injury. And, my body just takes a while. But as of today, I am starting to turn a corner and I'm very excited to be talking with you all. And, so hopefully you don't mind too much of what you're hearing. I know it might be a little bit annoying, but I appreciate you all very much. So what I want to talk about today is I'm going to talk about Summer House, because Summer House has been so fascinating this season. And I will say this, I was never a huge watcher of Summer House because I don't often enjoy watching people just kind of like get blind drunk and what have you. That's, and I mean, I know I love Bravo and Housewives, right? And I know that's sometimes a whole part of it. But and plus I'm 43, right? I kind of felt like maybe Summer House was like a younger, I don't know what I thought, but either way, I was sleeping on it and I was missing out. So I've been all in Summer House this season. And I couldn't watch all the seasons just because it's too much. I have other things I need to cover and comment on. But what I did do was watched like some compilation videos from Bravo on YouTube about, Carl and Lindsay and Kyle and Amanda and, all of these relationships and things like that. So I did catch up. It's fascinating to me, doing what I do, to literally know what's coming with Carl and Lindsay, right? And you're getting a peek behind the curtain, which is pretty miraculous and just interesting to me. It's not often that me doing what I do, I get to see in real life the like active disintegration of, relationships. So it's fascinating for me to watch. And I also will say for those of you who are watching this on YouTube, I apologize because I right now have the complexion of a sickly Victorian child. And my condolences if you're if you're watching this right now. Again, doing the best I can do. Also, by the way, if people are watching this on YouTube, let me know because my YouTube doesn't get a lot of traction. I talk about a lot of topics that get hit by the algorithm. A lot of trigger warnings, a lot of, heavy topics. And so, I don't know if it's good to keep or not. And if I don't have to do video, I certainly don't want to, but TBD on that. So going back to Summer House, it's just been fascinating to watch these relationships unfold. And also, I enjoy the show. It's a good show. I mean, it's a great season. Um, and I'm just kind of fascinated by it. So the first thing that I'm going to talk about is, again, because admittedly, I haven't watched for a long time, Danielle Oliveira, I hope I'm saying her last name right, is a new kind of character to me. And up until this point, I had been focusing, on Lindsay and Carl and Kyle and Amanda, because that's kind of the low-hanging fruit, the most obvious, interesting situations for me. But Danielle, last episode, she just came in and wow, I had a really strong reaction to her. So the thing that I want to say about Danielle is that, because, I was really taken aback by, her treatment of Gabby last episode. Danielle has such an abrasive communication style. And what's wild about Danielle is she holds strong opinions about things that she clearly doesn't fully understand, right? Like, I always feel like it's a little red flag when someone who's having difficulty managing romantic relationships tries to give other people advice about that exact topic. If you're having trouble with it, what makes you think that you are in a place to give advice and feedback, especially to Paige? Because Paige and Craig, I love them. I think they're a beautiful couple. I think they're so smart in terms of how they manage their situation. Paige isn't some delusional person who just thinks this is a fairy tale that's going to work out. Her and Craig are realistic that we love each other, but is love enough? And that's so amazing, to be able to kind of have that view. Like, he's in Charleston and she's in New York, and, she's very independent and all these things. And so I think that for me, Danielle trying to give Paige advice about Craig is laughable, quite frankly. And I think that when you give feedback from a position like this, where you're giving someone feedback unsolicited, number one, which is part of the problem too, right? Like, we don't just want to be dropping our opinion bombs on people. That's usually when you're giving feedback from this place, it's not healthy or helpful in any way. I think people like Danielle lack awareness into how they're perceived, but then also claim to like not care. And Danielle definitely does not have accountability in terms of what is her role in these relationship issues. She kind of gets mad, doubles down, and then the next day pretends like nothing happened. And that is the opposite of accountability. I think that, one of the things that frustrates me is that people like Danielle, like, we all know these people who they claim to like tell it like it is, which is usually just a euphemism for my opinion is more important than your feelings. And it's just a great way to like avoid ownership and accountability. So, I find it really, I find her interesting, and I'll be interested to see like how this progresses. Because the thing is, like, when she and Paige were talking in the bedroom, and Danielle talked about like being a CEO, and Paige was like, "Of what?" Oh my God, I cackled. I am loving Paige this season. I just love Paige in general. I think that Paige is one of those people that she's just got like a good, solid foundation, I think. She's got a good picker. She's got a good understanding of relationships and the way things work. I think maybe in another life, Paige, I don't know, could have been a therapist, a marriage and family therapist. She really seems to have her finger on the pulse sometimes of what's going on, in my opinion. And listen, maybe that's selfish or whatever, because a lot of times what she says makes sense to me. So, who knows? But I do like Paige, and I think she really was spitting truth bombs about Danielle. Gabby is not Danielle's employee, but it also seems like she's not her friend either. Because here's what really frustrated me with this whole scene. So Gabby's, crying, hysterical, which, by the way, side note, and please forgive me because I am going to be a little all over the place, but Gabby went on Watch What Happens Live with Lindsay after the episode, and I am going to talk about that because I do tend to watch all that stuff, the after shows and things like that. There is a lot of good information in that. When people think there's more anonymity in an after show or something, I don't know. But poor Gabby, I wanted to reach out and I wanted to hug her because, she talked about how she holds in her tears, and then she'll have this like one episode where she just like completely freaks out and hyperventilates. And I just want to let her know that's not the way she needs to live. I think that's torture. I think that our society really has bastardized crying. Crying is one of the most amazingly helpful, emotionally to process our emotions. You got to cry it out. Now, listen, I say this as someone who like clinically has a hard time crying, right? Due to my stuff, it's something that I work on. And so I've learned the importance of it. And I mean, literally, when we cry, there's neurobiology to that. There's serotonin, there's dopamine. There are things that are released in our brains when we have a release of emotion. And when we repress our emotion, that is when bad things happen. Both our mental health, physical health, emotional health, spiritual health, all of it. It's like if you went and you broke your leg and you just chose to ignore it. Well, that's going to get septic. And emotions are the same. And so my message to Gabby would be, please know that you are a strong, fierce woman. You're amazing, beautiful, wonderful. And you got to let it out, girl. We all have to let it out because that is a recipe for disaster. And also, like, how not fun is that? To just not cry for 2 years and then like have like one huge day of a ton of emotions. It tells me maybe where Gabby's coming from in terms of her fear of the emotion, but I promise you that weighs harder. I promise you. If you cry a little bit more frequently, like that's going to be less emotionally taxing than having these kind of, hyperventilation events. And so just a friendly PSA, crying is beautiful. It's necessary. It's important. Actually, I think crying is a sign of strength, which I try to remind myself as I'm, struggling myself. But I just, kind of wanted to touch on that. So the thing that really bothered me about Danielle in this scene was, Paige is trying to tell her, you hurt her feelings, right? It's not so much about Balloon Guy. It's about, the competition and not being supportive of Gabby and, being kind of strange about the whole thing. And so when Paige says, you hurt her feelings, and then Danielle replied that that's silly, that's not cool. That's not cool. If you hurt someone and they tell you that you've hurt them and you refuse to attend to that, that's a you problem. I'm being honest. That's a you problem. Refusing to check on your friend and claim that it's silly that shows more about your ego than it does about your concern for their well-being. And listen, we all have defenses. All of us do. And so Danielle wasn't sober, right? And so I'm sure that factored into it. Would she have done the same thing sober? I don't know. Has she? I don't know. I'm actually asking you all because, as I said, I'm kind of new to this. But for me, I just feel that it was important for me to talk about this because I didn't like the dismissing of feelings. And, good on Paige for being honest with Danielle and, really calling her out on this stuff. I just think Paige is a good person and a good friend, and she's gonna say things, but not in the tell you how it is way. That's a good delineation too. Paige is a good example of someone who will say things that need to be said and hold people accountable, but not in the way of like, screw your feelings, you're silly, I don't care about this. Again, in my opinion. And then conversely, the scene with Paige and Sierra talking to Amanda in the store, to me, that was a masterclass in how to really give constructive feedback from a place of genuine love and support, right? So it was so fascinating to me in this episode. We had two examples, like one of what not to do and one of, wow, this is a masterclass in how to support your friend. Because I think Amanda, her whole life has been Kyle, and she's unhappy, not necessarily always because of Kyle. I think she's unhappy, as Paige and Sierra said, with herself. She's beautiful, she's talented, and she's taking all of that energy and putting it into Kyle. And so I just hope that Amanda heard that feedback, because she deserves better than that. Because whatever happens with her and Kyle, and listen, they love each other, and I hope they're happy, and I hope they make it and they're successful. But whether they do or don't, Amanda has to find her happy, and it can't just be Kyle. Because then that turns into codependency, and codependency is when essentially somebody else becomes our emotional thermostat. That's the best way that I describe it that resonates with people. And so if Kyle's having a good day, she's having a good day. If he's not, she's, there's a lot of codependency there, which again, no shade, because a lot of relationships feature codependency, and it takes a lot of work to get out of that. But I just think that it was such a good example of two different ways to do two different things. And honestly, Paige's confessionals, I cackle every week. I mean, they're so funny. She's just like, her comedic timing. I don't know. I have just loved like every single bit of it. So now on to the big scene, with Carl talking to his mom and stepdad. So his mom's name is Sharon. His stepdad's name is Lou. And also, I kind of wanted to ask you guys, I don't know what happened to Carl's biological father. And if you do, please let me know. I've been sick, so I haven't been as actively researching things as I would normally like to. But I'm not sure, like, I believe he's alive. I guess he's just not in his life. So, the scene with Carl talking to them both, it was very hard to watch because, and listen, people, believe it or not, I have a lot of empathy for Lindsay and Carl. I got a bad podcast review because someone was mad that I didn't support Lindsay. It's like, I can say anything and people get mad about it. People have to remember what I'm saying into the mic right now is my opinion as of this moment, as of what I'm seeing, but things change. And things happen and new information comes up. I'm not stuck to one opinion or anything like that. And so I think what frustrates people is that I'm never going to be team anybody. You know that. I don't believe in that. I am team accountability. I am team everybody plays a role. Carl's made missteps. Lindsay's made missteps. And they're both humans who are deserving of happiness. So, I mean, that's really all I can say about that. But when Lou seemed to have some very strong opinions. And, on the one hand, I felt like, yeah, I mean, that's your family, right? When you love someone, you're going to say, hey, I have these concerns. But to bring those concerns on TV and not have Lindsay, be able to necessarily speak to that, that felt a little bit unfair. But so Lou brings up a Memorial Day fight that he labeled as abusive. And I think that's maybe what I'm referring to here. It's not like they were just talking about, shooting the breeze or general stuff. Labeling the fight as abusive is a big label. And I'm sure Lindsay felt that very deeply. And, then he said, as a minister, he wouldn't agree to marry them. There is no doubt in my mind that this conversation was the final nail in their coffin, Lindsay and Carl's, because you could just tell he was unhappy. And this feedback really, like, I could tell it had clicked in his brain. I think it clicked in his brain before that. But here's the major, I've been really supportive of Carl in terms of, I think the whole, what happened with Lindsay about cocaine Carl and all that stuff. That was really unfair and really uncool. But Carl's also doing something uncool, which is he's having a lot of feelings about things that he's not sharing with Lindsay. So, case in point, at the beginning of the episode, when they're finishing their conversation by the pool about how Lindsay, wants more of Carl, and she says to him, I wanted to stay at home and be a mom. And he's like, oh, gee, I never knew that. And I was just like, oh my God, how did they not talk about this? But you can tell he's like having emotions about this, and he's just pretending to kind of be cool, pretending to, take it all in. And in my opinion, he's white knuckling hard conversations, just like waiting for it to be over, having hurt feelings, and then not sharing his feelings with Lindsay, but sharing his feelings with everybody else about Lindsay. It's not fair to her. It's not fair to him. And I understand that sometimes, people feel Lindsay can make it hard to have feelings, for Carl to be vulnerable. And I think certainly at times that's been true. But at some point, it also becomes a Carl problem that if we can't be honest with our partner about vulnerable feelings, that's a huge red flag. And there could be a million reasons why. A million reasons why. There's not just one reason why, but there are bigger issues at play if you're like, I'm having this feeling about this and I can't talk to this person about it, right? That for me is a huge red flag. And I think that whether Lindsay responds well or not, Carl is doing a lot of talking about how he's feeling to everyone other than her, which that doesn't usually work really well. So I think that in general, Lindsay and Carl are just incompatible as romantic partners. And this is what I talk about when I mean that love isn't always enough. And this is where Paige and Craig understand that concept, is that sometimes we can be friends. Sometimes we can, have these relationships that don't work romantically. Because again, love isn't enough and there's a million other things. It just seems like Lindsay and Carl are not compatible. And they're just also like not effectively communicating. It was so wild when they were talking by the pool, and they both walk away from this discussion with two completely different viewpoints. Lindsay goes in, talks to someone, and says, we just had a breakthrough moment. And Carl is harboring lots of stuff that we find out after the fact. So they're just missing each other. They're not communicating. They're, in my opinion, completely just missing each other and having a hard time seeing where each other's coming from. And so to me, it's no surprise that this relationship did not work. Now, again, following the episode, Lindsay was a guest on Watch What Happens Live. By the way, she looked beautiful, absolutely gorgeous. And I think she really handled herself with grace and dignity. Andy said to her, you seemed like a couple that shouldn't have got married. You know how shady Andy can be. And he's just kind of like, boo, there it is. And she agrees with that. You know what I mean? So Lindsay, she talks about the upcoming reunion, which I promise you all, I will dedicate an entire podcast to the reunion. Depends how much information's in it. Maybe I'll do one on each part of the reunion. I have no idea. But I am extremely fascinated to see what that reunion is going to look like, because as of last week, it hadn't taped yet. I don't know if it's taped now. But Lindsay, here's the thing. On Watch What Happens Live, she said she understood the impact that his parents' words had on him. And she was kind of magnanimous and said, we all have our own truths. But then on social media afterwards, she made a comment about, Carl planting seeds and gardening and, kind of whatever, which, listen, I mean, being heartbroken, I get it. It sucks. And apparently Lindsay said that she's moved on. She's seeing someone special. And, good for her. I hope that she's happy. I hope that he's happy. But I think the point is that breakups can teach us valuable lessons about ourselves if we pay attention. And, nobody's perfect and everybody plays a role in relationship issues. And all we can do is be mindful of the role that we play. So one last note on this I did want to say is that as a therapist, I've done individual therapy, marriage and family therapy, couples therapy, things like that. The thing that I find the most consistent yet surprising is that too often people rush into whether it be getting married, aka Luann and Tom, right? Or rushing to try to have a baby, aka Kristen and Luke, hoping it will be a magical band-aid that fixes all their underlying issues, when in reality is it just adds more layers of stress to an unstable foundation. That's a fact. So, marriage certainly doesn't fix anything. Children certainly don't fix anything. They just add, a lot of stressors and a lot of different facets. So I recommend premarital counseling to people. And again, some people think premarital counseling has to be religious or whatever it is that you want to do through your church, through a regular therapist, through, I don't know, whatever it is you want to do. The point is, we have to, when we're getting ready to partner with someone, if the goal is for the rest of our lives, because listen, not everybody has that goal either, which I'm not going to define what marriage and long-term relationships should be for people. For me and my husband, I can say we're in it forever. And I'm fortunate, and because we both work really hard on ourselves individually and as a couple. And we were both worked really hard to be on the same page with things. And that's not to say that things don't change. Sometimes things can change, but the point is that you have to go into relationships understanding what your expectations are of each other, what your plans are for career, what your plans are for finances, what your plans are for family planning. That's the biggest one to me, is that the biggest mistake that people make, I think that leads to breakups, divorce, and things like that, is one or both parties go into the relationship hoping that the other will change their mind. That is a recipe for failure. That is a setup, a lose-lose situation. I promise you that. Avoiding tough topics or, just saying, okay, let's get married, let's have the baby, and then we'll figure it out. That ain't going to happen. So I am grateful that Lindsay and Carl were able to, well, I guess I don't know if they're doing this, but are able to take a step back and to say, okay, what was my role here? What wasn't working? And what do I need to do differently next time? Because whether it's Carl or Lindsay or anybody, if anyone is doing these things that I'm saying and they're going into a marriage or a child or a relationship, it's going to be tricky, if successful. So that's kind of my thoughts on that. The other thing that I will talk about, I'm going to do a bigger podcast about this, more specifically, but I wanted to transition quickly to the Valley. The last episode of the Valley was beyond wild, with Jesse literally pushing, assaulting people on TV, and everyone was just like, yeah, that's fine. And I'm like, what's happening here? People are saying this is fine. This is not fine. This is wildly inappropriate. But I get so many messages about I have a lot of therapist friends in on Instagram, and I mean, where everyone is obsessed with the show. It's just, who would have thought that the Valley would have been so enticing and interesting and such a disaster? But again, it's like, to me, I feel the same way about the Valley that I do about Summer House. It's like we're getting to watch what is happening with Jackson and Brittany as it's happening. It's like so fascinating to me. So I did a post on Instagram that got a lot of, some people did not like it, but I addressed how Kristen Doute, she claimed to be an empath, and that's kind of been a source of the butt of some jokes and things like that. You know, Janet has come forward and you know, talked about she's not friends with Kristen anymore. Michelle Lally, who is now divorced from Jesse and she's dating someone else, they're not friends anymore. So I just wanted to share something about that, about, you know, for myself as a trauma survivor and a therapist. So I'm a professional and a patient. I think that, you know, there's something behind the whole empath thing that isn't talked about enough, which is that usually people who are empathic, well, first let me explain. So an empath is a term used to describe kind of like a sixth sense, wherein a person is highly attuned to the inner experience and emotions of others. And the concept can be romanticized, but there are deep trauma roots in that. So essentially what happens is, if we have a significant trauma history and we are in fight or flight, we become attuned to people's facial expressions, change of tone of voice, like the slightest little things. If you talk to trauma survivors, they will say that they can know within a change of a look what's going on with somebody that they have been abused by. So what it really is, it's a heightened awareness. It's a survival mechanism of, it keeps people safe. Oh, when I see so-and-so do this with their eyes or this with their tone of voice, I know it's not safe for me. So I need to make an exit plan. Okay. Now, this is not the only explanation. This is what people got so angry about, is that there are other explanations for the empathic situation, but this is a fact. What I'm telling you is a fact, is that when this process happens, our nervous system becomes dysregulated and it smolders, and it creates a myriad of mental, physical, and emotional consequences. It does. When you are in chronic fight or flight, there is so much research, so much area of study when it comes to epigenetics and neurobiology and all of these things about how chronic fight or flight and chronic trauma impacts the body. I always talk about this book. It's my favorite. It's called The Body Keeps the Score. And the body does keep the score. And so a lot of folks, so chronic illnesses, a lot of them are rooted in prolonged trauma, widespread inflammation, and tinnitus. This is one thing that I did want to actually make sure to say today. I have never met a trauma survivor who didn't have tinnitus. And I have tinnitus, severe, and I also have hearing loss due to my chemotherapy was toxic to my auditory nerve. So it's something that I experience, and I've never met a trauma survivor who doesn't experience that in some way, shape, or form. You know, you go to doctors and they'll say it's because of X, Y, and Z, but a lot of somatic practitioner meaning like how we feel emotions in our body, they will all tell you the same thing. And there is some research behind that. So I do plan to kind of do more of a deep dive on that and talk a little bit about it. But one of the things in my post that I talked about was how empaths and narcissists have similar wounds, but they're very often drawn to one another, because they're both looking for love and approval, but the difference is they have very different motivations and intentions. Trauma survivors have such a high threshold for pain that by the time they realize they're being kind of fed upon by a narcissist, they're usually critically ill. So some of what I'm talking about is, if this resonates with you, all we can do is use healthy boundaries. We can only do better once we know better. I exclusively dated narcissists until I did work on myself. and really looked at this and, how it impacted me and things like that. Because people who are empathic, they want to fix, they want to change, they want to help. But here's what you guys have to understand about narcissists. Narcissists don't go to therapy. And if they do, there is some research to show that talk therapy can actually help them sharpen their predatory behaviors, sadly. And, the thing is that when they usually come into therapy, it usually is short-lived or not long-lasting. I've had several experiences with this. One in which my life was threatened, and it was a whole thing. So maybe I'll share that story at a later date. But the point is that it's important to be aware of how our trauma and our stuff is impacting us and how it's impacting other people, for ourselves and just for the greater good. So I think that Kristen certainly has a lot of stuff that I think she has a hard time being willing to look at. And, again, no shame. I think, I wish her the best. I wish her and Luke the best. I just think it is wild to, she talks about, being empathic, and then she kind of does. The thing about Kristen is that she's a truth teller. Like, a lot of trauma survivors fancy themselves truth tellers. I'm probably one of those people. But the problem is it's the way Kristen goes about it. She truth tells in a way that it is disrespectful to her and to other people, and it kind of usurps her point. And she makes it easy. She makes it low-hanging fruit for people to talk about, the crazy Kristen. And I'm using that in quotes because I hate it so much. I don't like that at all. I'm not supportive of it. At the same time, Kristen does have to be aware of how her behaviors are being perceived. And, when you're upset about something, I think what happens when we're upset says a lot about our character. And Kristen definitely tends to be very reactive, emotionally reactive. She has trouble with emotion regulation and things like that. And so, that's that. So I am going to wrap it up here because my voice is, I'm having a hard time. And I think that this is the best that I can do for today. So the last thing that I'm going to say is, in addition to this episode today, I am finally releasing a episode for supporters, Spreaker Supporters Club. So you'll see that will start coming up on my feed. The Supporters Club is $5 a month. If you would like to join, find me Your Bish Therapist, and you just click support under Spreaker. For those of you who have done that, thank you so much. I appreciate you all. And so essentially what that means is that when I do take a break, so this is season 2. I've already done season 1. This is season 2. At some point, probably at the end of June before my vacation, I will end season 2 and take a break. But when I'm on my breaks, I will do at least one episode a month. Maybe more. I'm not sure. I have to see where I'm at while I'm on my break. So if that's something that you're interested on, please go ahead. If not, no problem. There are many ways to support me, and I appreciate you all. So for today, this is going to be it for me. I hope you've enjoyed the episode. Please check out Your Bish Therapist on Instagram. Please go ahead and give me a 5-star review. I'd appreciate it. If you're watching this on YouTube, please let me know that I should continue doing that. And just please take care of yourselves and each other, and please stay away from this virus. Disclaimer: posts are not intended to diagnose, treat, or provide medical advice. Your Bish Therapist is for entertainment and informational purposes only. The podcast, my opinions, and posts are my own and are not associated with past or present employers, any organizations, Bravo TV, Greyheart Productions, or any other television network. The information in YBT podcast and on its social media is provided for general informational purposes only and is not intended to diagnose or treat. Please do not act or refrain from acting based on anything you read, see, or hear on YBT podcast or associated social media. Communicating with YBT via email and or social media does not form a therapeutic alliance. Melissa, operator of YBT, is unable to provide any therapeutic advice, treatment, or feedback.